Okay, welcome everyone to our fourth session in the Scratch course. Very shortly, Eric will be sending a Google form link for everyone to submit their homework from last week, which, if you remember, was to complete the animation for all of our buttons to make it correspond to the correct movement sprites. So I'll give everyone about a minute to submit their homework, and then I'll briefly go over the answers to the homework from last week.
Hello. Oh, wait, what?
Yeah.
This is our first class. We don't really know what to do.
Oh, this is the first class that you're joining?
Well, me and my sister have been to.
Okay, after I go over after everyone submits the homework, everyone who has been here for the past 3 or 4 weeks, after that, I'll go over the homework and then send my project link in the chat. And then and then you can continue building from that project. But if you want access to like previous recordings or previous classes, you can stay on after, and then we can provide those for you. Okay, we're going to get started now, and I'm just going to go briefly through the code and then send my project link the chat. So before I forget, I want everyone to make a copy of the current project right now. So whatever you have right now, go into File and click Save as a Copy. And you'll see the copy after the name of your program. I just want everyone to do that so that when we review your code from this class, we know that it's what you did at home and not what you did during the class. So I want everyone to go do this really quickly right now. Okay, so I'm going to go through the code really quickly. So what you had to do was make each one of these different sprites that we created in the first lesson and correspond it to each of the different driving or movement blocks. Like the cat was four-way movement, car was driving movement, and then the basketball's mouse movement. So the most important thing that you probably need is these message receive blocks, such as like the drive movement button clicked, the movement button animation finished. So in each of the individual buttons that you see here, you should have this segment of code that says, when I receive some other button clicked, then stop all the other scripts in Sprite, and that will make sure to stop this forever loop. Because if this forever loop is still here, and you accidentally click on the spot where this current button's hidden, then it might cause an error because it will broadcast all of these multiple messages again, and we don't want anything random showing up. We don't want anything random showing up at the middle of our game. And then we have like the decreasing animation, the same thing that we saw in our forever loop here. And this segment of code, it should be pretty much the same for all of your other buttons. So as you can see, all of these like message calls are here. And one thing to be aware of is to make sure that you have the correct message name up here, or else that might cause additional errors later. So make sure, or like if you press one of the buttons and something else doesn't disappear like it's supposed to, that's when you need to change these message calls to make sure the game works correctly. And same thing for the mouse movement. Okay. And for your individual movement sprites, you have to make sure to hide the specific sprite at the beginning, and make it show when it receives the button animation finished block, when it receives one of the messages from each of these, and you have to make sure it corresponds to which one you want to use. So forward movement would be the cat, a driving movement would be the car, and mouse movement would be the basketball. And all of these functions down here are the same as what we have created from before. So this is what the cat should look like, the car, and then the basketball. Okay, now that I've gone over this, I'm going to share the link of my project in the chat, and everyone who isn't caught up yet can just remix my project and continue with whatever we're doing today. Okay, so now let's go back to our four-way movement button code. So this one down here. And if you notice, a lot of the blocks in here are pretty much the same. Like the ones under the movement button clicked, these ones are pretty much identical. And then also underneath our if statement, if the button is pressed down, this portion, it's pretty much the same, right? Like the disappearing animation is the same as this. So except for if it clicks it, then there are different broadcast messages. But the problem with our code right now is that this is a lot of lines of code. We have 5 blocks of code here, another 5 over here, another like 7 to 10 over here. And that can be really hard for you to troubleshoot later on if something goes wrong, or it's like really hard for other people to view your code. So now that we have kind of a general structure for this, we're going to learn how to condense this code down, make it shorter, and make it so that whoever's viewing our code can have an easier access just like looking at it instead of going through each line of code and seeing what it does. So in order to do that, we're going to be making a block. So under my blocks, you can see that you can make a block for the specific sprite that you're on. So right now we're on four-way movement button. So I'm just going to make a block. So what this will do is we can define a series of code to make it so that we can replace all these 5 lines of code, like 5 blocks of code, with just one singular code when we finish making our block. So before we do that, let's make a block first. And you see, this is kind of what your block will look like. And down here, there are different input values that you can put. You can put like a number down here. You can put a boolean, which is like our hexagon shape that we've talked about. And you can also add text, which is what we already have at the top here. So what I want everyone to do is to click the middle one, add a boolean input. That will bring out a new box from here. And what we want this segment of code to do, what we want this method to do, is to make a disappearing animation for each one of our blocks, so we don't have to continuously paste like 5 blocks of code. Instead, we can just replace it with 1 block of code. So I'll just name this as disappear animation. And for the boolean name, I want to know whether the button is clicked or not, right? Because if it is clicked, remember we have to broadcast some messages. But if it's not clicked, then we can just do the disappearing animation. If you look at these two side by side, this one broadcasts the messages, and this one doesn't have any of these yellow broadcast messages. So once you do that, you'll notice this kind of large red block that appears. And this is what we can use to define our method. It says define this block right here. That's what we can use to put all of these individual pieces of code inside of here, so that when we go to use this block right here, this disappear animation block, we can just shorten this 5 block of code, or this 7 to 10 line block of code, into just this 1 block of code, which makes it easier for everyone to view. So first, let's look at the similarities between all of these different lines of code. So if I see here, you can see that this like set size 2 is similar. There's a repeat block, and there's also a hide block. So this part of the code is similar, right? So we can just put this underneath our define block, and we can essentially replace all of these blocks of code that we just had with this 1 block here, But notice there's still an empty parameter here, right? There's like a clicked, there's a clicked boolean, and that's what we want that to be true when the individual button is clicked. So when the forward movement button is clicked, and we want it to be false when any of the other buttons are clicked. Okay, so before we add any of this like complicated boolean stuff, let's add the stop other scripts in sprite at the top here. And what this will do is make it so that we don't need any of these stop script blocks in our code. Instead, we can just use this one. And what this will do is it will stop everything else that's going on in the background. So like I said before, we won't have that like forever loop error where something just randomly pops out at the middle of you playing the game. Okay, so now let's find a way to add these broadcast messages into the method so that we can cut down on all of this code. So what do we want it to do? We want it to disappear and broadcast all of these different messages when the specific button is clicked. When the button that the sprite you're on, that button is clicked, then you want to broadcast these messages. But if this specific button isn't clicked, if any of these other buttons are clicked, then we don't want any of these broadcast messages to come out. So that's what we can use as kind of the premise, the basis of how we're going to create this Boolean like factor. So what you need to do is to bring out an if-then block, put 1 first at the beginning because you need to broadcast the forward movement button clicked at the beginning. And what you can actually do is drag down this clicked Boolean from the top into this space. And then at the beginning, when this button is clicked, then we can broadcast a four-way movement button clicked, right? And same thing with the other one. So the other one, we want it to broadcast the animation finish when it's completely hidden, when we finish like going through this disappear animation. So we can snap this onto the bottom and once again bring down a clicked Boolean from up here and snap this broadcast forward movement button animation finished. So now that we have a general definition of our method, we can start plugging the values in for our different button clicked instances, and we can see how the code works. So if you click on my blocks again, you'll see this one block here. If you drag it out, there's a Boolean factor in here, right? Because we added a clicked Boolean here that will determine whether this specific button is clicked. Well, let's say I want to put it here. I want to put it under when the start game button animation finished, and also when my mouse is down touching and my mouse is down on the button. And in this case, we know that our button is being clicked because we've specifically defined it as if it is touching the mouse pointer and if the mouse is down, right? So right now I'm just hovering over it, so it will run this else if code. But if I click on it, then it should be doing the same disappear animation as before. So let's go do this right now. Inside of this, we know that this Boolean will be true because this button is going to be clicked, and we've already defined that. So in order to make this true always, the simplest way we can do it is to bring out an operators block, the equals operators block, and slide it in there, and we can just make both of them equal. So 0 is equal to 0, right? So that's always going to be true in math. So this won't ever change. So now that we know that this is true, it will go through every line of code, including all of these if statements. But what happens if it's false? If clicked is false, that means it skips these whatever's inside these if statements, right? If clicked is false, then these underneath these other movement button clicked, then it won't broadcast any messages. And that's what we want for these two. So we need to find a way to make clicked false and always false. So we can bring out the same equals operator block, but instead of putting something like 0 is equal to 0, which is always true, we can put something like 0 is equal to 1. Something to note here is that you can put anything in here, but you have to make sure that this has to be true and this has to be false. So you can use any of these other operators here. Like if you wanted it to be true, this can be 0 is less than 50. And for false, you can put this to be 51, it's less than 50, right? But the simplest way to do it is just to use primary numbers like 0 and 1. And you can also replace this block of code here with the disappear animation. Okay, so now if I test my code for the four-way movement button, you can see that everything still works accordingly. Everything still disappears for each of the movement buttons, like this. But if you go over to any of your other buttons, if you look at my screen, you'll see that over here, under my blocks, the disappear animation block isn't there anymore. And that's because methods are created specifically for the sprite that you're on. So this one was created specifically for the four-way movement button. So for these other buttons, we want to use the same concept. We still want to use the method call, this method to shorten down our code. So the simplest way to do that is to just copy paste this all these blocks of code into the different areas, and also replacing the broadcast calls. So I'm going to give everyone about 2 minutes to copy this method from the four-way movement button to each of the other ones, and make sure you change these broadcast messages to whichever broadcast messages are already here. So for driving movement, you would change it to driving movement button clicked and driving movement animation finished, and the same thing for mouse movement, and you have to make sure that it matches with the button that you're on. Okay, so I'm going to give everyone 2 minutes to do that, and we'll come back together to reveal the answer.
So we're supposed to copy what to the other two thingies or sprites?
Alright, so make sure you copy your disappear animation method to each one of these other buttons. Make sure that you change the name of the messages that you're broadcasting so that we don't create any bugs later on. And also replace whatever's underneath here. So like replace the 5-line code with just this one disappear animation. Okay, everyone should be done copying and pasting their code now. So what I have right here is all of the 3 buttons: forward movement, driving, and mouse. And when I click on each of them, they still work in accordance to what I want, but they have a lot simpler code now. So I've copied and changed the message calls for each one of these, and for the mouse movement one as well. So now if you look at this code and you look at the code from before, you can see that this is much simpler for whoever's using it to read. They can go to this block and say, oh, it's a disappear animation. You can go to this method, look at this method, and know what the sprite is going to do. But if you had all of these lines of code underneath one of these, it makes it hard for someone to go through each individual section of code from like here to here to here to make sure that you didn't have anything wrong with the code. So this just makes it a lot easier for everyone to look at. Oh, and if you don't know how to copy paste, it's just dragging whatever you want to copy, and you can drop it underneath whichever sprite you want, and just make sure you see kind of this like wiggle movement, and then you know that that block of code, that section of code will go into this whichever sprite you want. Okay, now that we've simplified our code down a little bit, let's start making some new sprites so that we can get moving with our maze game. So first thing that we're going to be creating is a door. So we want a door to kind of open up to the next level, to the next stage of the maze game. So we can just create a new sprite by painting it and just make it any color that you want. Okay, and if you want to make sure that if you're going to be adding like squares or rectangles onto your door, make sure to just copy paste using Control-C, Control-V to make sure that you get them to be the same size. And you can also copy these two individual blocks to make sure that the bottom two are the exact same distance apart. Okay, so that's going to be my door. Okay, and if you haven't created a door during this short time, then just make sure you have at least a rectangle on the screen that you can use as the door. Also, make sure to name your sprite door so we don't get confused with it later on. So for this door, we want this door to be at this very corner, so that the sprite will start here and have to move to this spot over here to make sure it completes the game. But before I do that, I'm going to make my door a little bit smaller by just going to looks and setting the size to 50%. And I also want to make sure it's positioned in this spot every single time. So I'm going to bring out a go to XY block, and I'm just going to make it 200 Y 130. So that's a good spot. But right now our door is going to be showing whenever we press the start button, whenever we press the green flag. So we need to make sure that this is hidden until we go into our game. So at the beginning, we want to first go to looks and hide it. And first question for today. How do we make it show when all of these sprites are showing? So all of these sprites are receiving a button animation finish message when the button that is clicked, these ones will appear. But something that we can do for the door differently is this. So just now it was hidden because we hid it when when green flag was clicked. But if you notice, when it goes onto the game screen, the backdrop changes, right? So as you remember from last week, we created 2 backdrops, one for the menu screen, which is this bluish color, and then one for the game screen, this green color. And there's actually a block under events that says when backdrop switches to. So if we pull that out and we change this to when backdrop switches to the game screen, we know that for each one of these, when each one of these movement sprite appears, that it's always going to be on the green screen. So we can just replace all of these lines of code, like when animation finish, when the animation finish message is received, we can replace all 3 of these with just this one event block because we know that it's going to be green always. So once it turns green, then this door can show. So if we test it now, okay, so the door shows. For any other button, it also shows. Okay, so now we have a position for next levels in our game. Now let's set a defined position for each one of our movements. We'll be starting off with the cat. So under forward movement, we have the cat. And as you can see here, our cat is slightly too big for the door, right? We want our cat to be slightly smaller so it can actually fit through the door and can't fit through the door that's too big. So let's make it a little bit smaller, the same way as we did for the door, the set size to 50%. And we can also make it go to a specific position to start each mix. So we want it to start in this bottom corner right here every single time. So we can just make it go there at the very beginning of the game. So I can make it go to x, say -200 and y -130, so that these are pretty much diagonal to each other. So now if I run it, you can see that our cat is much smaller. Cat is much smaller and it goes to this position every time. And make sure that if you had any like go to X, Y blocks over here, that you remove it because we already have one here and we don't want it to go to the center after we've set it to go to the beginning. Okay, so now when we run this code, I know we don't have levels yet, but the door that the cat is supposed to touch when it finishes the level, it doesn't do anything, right? It just stays on top of the door, and that's not what we want. We want the cat to be able to touch the door, and then that will bring the cat back to this original position and bring out a new level game, which we'll create later. But first, let's create the section of code that will make the cat go back to the beginning, go back to its starting spot when it touches the door. So if you notice under sensing, go to sensing, the light blue tab, there's the very first one. It says touching mouse pointer, and if you click on this arrow down here, you can see that there are multiple possibilities for what this specific sprite can touch. So I'm going to click on door and see. So we want the cat to touch the door, and then after it touches the door, goes back to the beginning. So to do that, we can use another if-then block, then put it on top of what we already have here inside the forever loop. So I can bring out an if-then and make sure that I put it on top of all of these, like this, not like around it or inside of it, just on top. And I can drag the touching door there. And what I want it to do is, if it's touching that door, then go back to its original position. So I can just duplicate this block and bring it over here. Okay, so now if we test our code, here you see that the cat still starts in the bottom left corner. And if we make our way towards the door, watch what happens to the cat. It goes back to the beginning. So that's what we want for our game. We're going to be creating levels for our sprite next, and that will make the cat, that will also, this kind of movement, it can also make the different levels change when the cat hits the door. But right now we have some sort of portal for the cat to move through whenever it completes a level. But right now we only have a green screen, right? We only have this backdrop scene here, and we want there to be some obstacles for the cat to pass through. So what I'm going to do now is to create a few levels for our cat, and we're going to be doing that through the sprites. We're going to be creating a new sprite and calling it levels. So you can make your levels look like whatever you want. I'm going to make mine red so that our player knows to stay on the green and not touch the red. So for the first sprite, I'm going to just make a simple box and have the cat go around it. And you can also name your costume here. Name it level 1, because this is the first level that we're going to use. And then if you, let's say, duplicate this, then this number automatically turns into 2, and then you can edit this code or edit the maze however you want. So maybe for the second level, we can make it like this. Something like that, right? So I'm just going to be creating these two levels for now. We're going to have a breakout room session later where you can work with other people to come up with more levels. But right now, let's try and see what our level sprite will do. But before we do that, let's make sure to hide it and show it the same way we did with the door, so that it doesn't block up any of the text that we see here. So we can bring out a when green flag clicked and a when backdrop switches to game screen. And go into looks and show under the backdrop switch, and then hide when the green flag is clicked. Okay, so now it's showing. And we also have to make sure that, because our level sprite was kind of created on this grid and we saw like where it was placed, we have to make sure that our levels sprite is always at the center. It's always at the center of its position so that all these blocks are in the correct place. So let's make sure that we make it go to the center every single time. Okay, so now there are a few problems with our code. First, our cat doesn't receive any like penalties when it's touching this level sprite, and also it's going underneath the level sprite. And usually for like maze borders, you can't go underneath, right? The only thing you can do is to maybe go above. But right now our cat is going underneath all these red blocks, and that's because of the layers that are in Scratch. So think of it kind of as like a stack of books. So I have this stack of books. Imagine this is a perfect stack of books. And each book is its own layer. So here's one layer, here's another layer. Well, these are all the layers. And right now, our level sprite, the red one you see here, that's considered to be on the top layer. It's the very front layer, so it'd be this one. Be this first one here. One at the very top. But our cat, it's somewhere lower. It's like right here. Right? The cat is down here. But we want to make our cat move to the very top layer. We want to move this to here so that there's going to be a new kind of like layer here, and this one's going to be removed. The cat will be here, and then the level sprite will be just underneath. So yeah, that's what we have to do first, is to make the layers for this and also make kind of like a response for the cat when it touches this. So if you go under looks, you can see that there's at the very bottom there's these blocks called go to layer. So we're going to bring out this one that says go to front layer. Don't bring out the one underneath it that says go forward one layers. And like the book before, you can go back as many layers as possible, or you can go forward as many levels as possible. But if we want to go to the very top layer, the cat wants to go to the very top of the books, then we can just use this one code so that it goes to the top every single time. And we're going to put this when green flag clicked, and because this is the level sprite, since this is the level sprite, we're actually going to bring out the go forward one layers and change it to backward, so it goes back one layer behind the cat. So this one will go back one layer. And make sure it doesn't go to the very back layer, and that's what we want to avoid, to make it go to the very back layer. Yeah, so we have to make sure this goes to the front layer first, and then it can go backward one layer. And same thing for the door. We can also make this go to a backward layer because the cat can't be going behind the door, right? Okay. And then now for the cat, we want this to go to the very front layer. So if we do this, it will go to the first layer that there is, and then all of these other ones will be one layer behind it. So the cat will technically be directly on top of the level sprite and the door. So now if we test our code here, you'll see that it still doesn't the level sprite still doesn't give any response, but you can see that now our cat is on top of this layer, and it's slightly on top of the door as well. And if you go really slowly, you can see that like part of it will go slightly at the top of the door. Okay, so now what we want to be doing is to make a pain response for the cat. So right now it's still going on top of our levels, and we want to make sure that if it touches like the borders, then it will do the same thing as the door. It will make the cat go back to the beginning. So we can do this by doing the exact same thing as the door. If we want to do this, we can just duplicate this and put it underneath. And change this, instead of saying door, make it say levels. So if it's touching the different levels, then it will also go back to the beginning. So let's test that. And if I purposely run into this, then you can see that my cat starts back at the beginning. Right? Let's say I run into it here. Okay, it goes back to the beginning. So now we've made successful like maze borders and things like that. Okay, and if you didn't want to use this, if like touching a certain sprite or something, there's also another block that you can use in replacement for this building block. It's also under sensing, and it's this touching color block. Okay. So if right now all of our levels, they were created in red or whatever color you created them in. So you could also replace this with, if this is touching the color red, then go back to the beginning. Or if like this one, the one directly underneath, if let's say the orange part of the cat is touching the red, then go back to the beginning. But this only works if all of your levels are the same color. If you had, let's say, an outline around your maze lines, then this would not work. And if you wanted to make your levels a different color, then obviously this would not work. So instead of using multiple of these touching color blocks, we can just simplify it by using this one touching levels block. And so no matter like what your maze looks like, no matter what color it is, this will still be true. Okay, so, and another problem for our game right now is if you go into levels and costumes, you can see that it starts on level 2 every single time. So we have this new level, but it always starts at this same level every single time. And what if I wanted it to start at the beginning, right? You want your game to always start at the first level, the easiest level, and then make it harder until, let's say, like level 10. So we need to make sure it starts at this level, level 1. So how can we do that? Well, under looks, remember that there are different costumes, right? So we've named our costumes different names. So this one's level 1, this one is level 2, and we want the costume to switch to level 1 every single time. So now if we try and run it, you can see that this goes to level 1 at the beginning, and when our cat touches it, it still goes back to the beginning. It still has the same functions as before. Except now when we touch the door, it doesn't go to a new level. We're still stuck on the same level. We go back to the same place but we're still on the same level. So let's try and fix that. So underneath our door, we need something to, underneath our cat, we want something to tell the Scratch program that, okay, I've reached the door. And if I've reached the door, that means that that current level is complete. And you want to tell another sprite to switch the costume onto the next level. So like we did with all of these buttons here, we can use a broadcast message. We can use a new broadcast message and put it inside of this if touching door. And since we've already used all of these messages that are already in here, we're going to be creating a new message, and we're going to call it level complete. So now we have a new message, and let's broadcast this message over to levels. Okay, so when I receive level complete, what do I want to do? Well, when I receive level complete, I want to go to the next costume, the next level, right? So underneath here, we have two different options for costumes. We have the switch costume to or the next costume. Well, what we can do is to use the switch costumes, but what if we had multiple levels? What if we had like 10 levels, right? Then we would have to broadcast so many messages just to make it go to each level. But instead, if we use next costume, then the costumes will just change one by one, and we only need this one broadcast messages instead of like 10, right? So we can bring this underneath the when I receive level complete, and now if I test it, you can see that it starts at level 1. It touches the door, and now it's at level 2. But see what happens after I complete level 2. So now my cat is about to go through the door again to get to the next level. But the problem is we don't have any more levels, right? We only had 2 levels, and what next costume does is after it completes like all of the levels that you had here. Let's say you created like 3 more levels like this, and you had 5 levels. After Scratch completes the last costume, then there's nothing else here. There's nothing else here, so it'll jump back to the beginning and go back to level 1. But we don't want to do that, right? Because if you're playing a game, you don't want to go back to the very beginning. If I'm playing level 5, pretend that was level 5, and I go back to level 1, I don't want to do the whole series again, right? So I'm going to be teaching everyone how to kind of make it stop after you complete all the levels. And but for now, because this session was a lot of like me talking and about how to create the maze game. Now everyone here, what you can do is we're going to be putting everyone into smaller breakout rooms, and you can work with each other to come up with more designs for your different levels. So right now we have 2 levels, right? This box and then this simple maze right here. But I want everyone to go into breakout rooms and create 3 more levels, at least 3 more levels, so that we have 5 levels to play with before we leave today. And just a heads up, try and make your levels a little bit easier than you usually would, so that it's easier to test your code and see if everything actually works. But now the breakout rooms are open, so everyone can just join.
Okay. So now that everybody's in their breakout rooms, do you want us to like monitor them? Like just we visit each room periodically just to make sure?
Yeah, I don't know, because usually if we did breakout rooms, it's kind of for a challenge, but I think this one is more creative, so I don't know. We can just let them, just like do their
Do what
projects.
they need to do? Yeah, sure. That makes sense. Okay, cool. Yep. Well, in that case, I guess how long would you want the breakout rooms open?
Maybe bring them back. Hold on.
Would 10 minutes sound okay?
Yeah, 10 minutes.
Okay,
That should be
cool.
good.
Cool.
Okay, maybe bring them back now.
Okay, sure.
Okay, I hope everyone had fun in your breakout rooms coming up with different level designs, and I hope you have at least 5. So now I'm going to teach everyone how to kind of like stop the game after it finishes all the levels. So if you look at your, if you click on your costumes tab over here, you can see how many costumes you've created, as well as which costume is like tied to which number. So level 1 would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So these are the different costume numbers that are in your level sprite. So that's the concept that we're going to be using to make the cat eventually go to like kind of a game 1 screen, like a congratulations screen, right? So right now underneath level complete, we have next costume. But we don't want this to go to the next costume if it's already on its last level. So right now I'm on my 3rd level, and this is my last level right here. This is my level 5. Okay, so after I reach the door over here, I don't want this to go back to level 1 because I don't want to do the entire maze again. Okay, so like I showed you before with these different costume numbers, you can actually access the number of like costumes that you have by just going over here. To the very bottom of looks, you'll see this bubble that says costume number. And what you want to do is bring out an operator's tab. So we saw that each level was corresponded to a different number. So what we want to do is, if the cat is on its last level, if this level, the costume number is 5, level 5, then we want to go to a whole different screen. So I can set this costume number to equal 5 and bring out an if-else block. So this will go, this green operator will go inside of our boolean, and inside of the else, I'm going to put next costume, because I don't want it to go to the next costume if it's already at 5. But what I do want it to do when it's at level 5 is to broadcast another message to all the other sprites to make it show a different screen, make it show kind of an ending screen when the cat has completed the full course or whatever sprite. So since I already created all of these messages and we've already used them, like I said before, we're going to create a new message that says game 1. And bring this whole thing to the level complete. Now, if you try going to the end of your 5th level, you'll notice that this doesn't really do anything yet. It'll still go back to the beginning, but the costume won't change. And that's because we don't have anywhere to receive this game 1 code yet. So that's what I want everyone to do for this week. I want everyone to create a game 1 screen, create a new sprite, and make sure it says game 1. And I want it to show when it receives this message. The reason that we're going to be using a sprite is the same reason we use sprites for like levels or the door, because we want it to be able to kind of like pop out and also have it change to that screen when the level is complete. But we also don't want to hide all of these level components. So instead of hiding them all for the backdrop, we can just like what we did here, go to the very front layer, make our game 1 screen, go to the front layer, and just tell the player that you finished this game and you have won. So that's what I want everyone to create this week, and also put in the code for it so that it can show after our game completes the very last level. So is that clear? Okay. If you guys don't have any questions, I've dropped my project link in the chat, so if you need to access it, you can. And if you don't have any questions, you're free to leave for today, but if you do, feel free to stay on and we can answer some questions. Have a great week.
I have a couple of questions, more like one.
Okay.
Well, basically, so for my thingy, so like I did everything else, but like I think it's for the 4-way movement, when you run it and you click the 4-way movement, it doesn't really do anything.
Okay, could you share your screen so I can see your code?
Okay.
Okay, that's because you still have to put in a boolean for the disappear animation underneath, like when you click the button. So if you go to the disappear animation block, this one,
Okay.
you have to put in a boolean under this. So okay, I think yes. So yeah, you should be putting, no, not the click. You should be putting if you should bring out an operator. So go over here to the green one and bring out an equals operator here, this one. Yeah, and drag it into that boolean and make it say 0 is equal to 0. Okay, so your code should work. And also take out this operator boolean right here, the green one. Just take out the green one and drag it back to 4. Okay, I think your button should work now. And if you made a similar error in any of the other blocks, then you can just change it.
Okay, I'll do that. How do you stop sharing?
Okay, other than that, does anyone else here have questions?
I actually have another one.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, with my door, when the levels, it doesn't show the door thingy. Wait, never mind. I'll fix that.
Okay, if anyone else here doesn't have any more questions, I'm just going to end the meeting right now, but if you do, just speak up.